my name is Alicia, and you are watching the Reptile Rendezvous. So in this week's video, we are going to be looking at the top 5 hardest parts about keeping reptiles. Now, this is not to say that reptiles aren't amazing pets. They truly are for anybody who does lots of research and spends lots of time caring for their animals. Unlike cats and dogs, though, reptiles can be a lot more complicated, and that's why I specified the lots of research part. Because unfortunately, without all the extra research, oftentimes reptiles are not kept properly. But for the context of this video, let's say that you have done all the proper research and your animals are being kept in the best possible care. These are still 5 reasons why I think keeping reptiles can still be pretty hard. And of course, this video is not meant to deter you from keeping reptiles. It is really just to give you an insight and give you a general idea of what you are getting into if you actually are new to this. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. So the first thing on this list is the cost. Of course, money is a big part of keeping reptiles. The cost of the animal, as well as the cost of housing the animal in their enclosures, really starts to add up. The animals themselves can be as little as $5, but depending on the species can go up to thousands. And when it comes to the enclosures and the lighting, that can also cost hundreds of dollars. I've probably spent over $1,000 on at least a few of my enclosures. And it doesn't just stop with the initial setup. You actually need to change their lighting on set intervals, which means that you actually have to dish out hundreds of dollars sometimes just on lighting. And if for some reason something goes wrong with your animal, emergency vet bills are crazy expensive. Checkups alone can cost between $150 to $200 Canadian. What all this basically means is that you have to be super prepared to spend a ton of money on your animals, more than you would with your average pet. And honestly, if you don't feel like you can dish out that money, then you probably shouldn't get these animals in the first place, because they do need specific things to be cared for correctly. The second item on this list actually goes with the last one, and that is health concerns and the vet. Now, unfortunately for reptile keepers, I think most of us know this, but reptiles don't tend to show symptoms of being sick until it's too late. This is super stressful because unlike cats and dogs, who often give you signs of illness, reptiles really don't show anything because they are often prey in the wild, and so showing signs of sickness is seen as something weak, and therefore they don't want to do that because predators are more likely to eat them. And this instinctive behavior still applies in captivity. It's pretty saddening because one day your reptile can be completely fine and the next you could find it passed away in its enclosure, and it's really something we can't control most of the time. Now, if you do catch any signs of illness before it's too late, you can actually take them to the vet. But the problem is vet bills, for one, are super expensive. And also, there's just a huge lack of research in reptiles because it's a relatively new space, meaning that oftentimes you could go to the vet and the vet basically tells you they have no idea what's going on. On top of this, depending on what area you live in, vets can be pretty unavailable. You might have to drive a few hours just to get to your nearest vet, and sometimes that's just too much time for your animal. For example, for me, my closest vet is an hour away, which is not super bad. I can get there in an emergency, but it's still pretty tough to drive almost 2 hours to bring them to the vet clinic. This is definitely a hard aspect of keeping reptiles, and it's definitely something to take into consideration depending on where you live. If you're planning to move somewhere, the first thing you should be looking at is whether or not there are vet clinics in your area. The next item on this list actually ties into the inaccessibility factor, and that is reptile supplies and reptile feeders. So not all areas, especially more remote areas, have reptile stores. This means simple things like substrate, hides, water dishes, food dishes can become very hard to actually find. This also applies to feeders, so like your rodents and your insects that you're giving to your animals. When it comes to that stuff, you can sometimes get it shipped from different companies, but shipping cost alone can add a hefty amount of money to your overall cost. Especially when you're shipping big things like glass enclosures, that adds a huge shipping cost because there's a liability factor there if the glass breaks. In other instances, feeders can also be pretty inaccessible because certain insects are just not available, or other rodents as well. So just these factors alone can actually make caring for your animal difficult, which I think is a very hard thing because you want to be able to give your animal the best care possible. Number 4 on this list is actually research and constantly changing standards of care. Keeping reptiles is a relatively new hobby. I don't really like using that word, but it is the best way of like describing it in this situation. But because of this, there's tons of new research being done every single day on how to keep animals, what to keep animals in, what to feed animals, and it just becomes a lot of information. Some commonly kept species like bearded dragons or ball pythons have been researched for a very long time, so their care is kind of not changing that much, but other species that are kind of less known seem to have a lot more research coming out about them, which makes it kind of difficult to keep them. For example, the original recommended size for a crested gecko enclosure was actually an 18 by 18 by 24 when I first started keeping reptiles, but recently it changed to 18 by 18 by 36, so that is a whole foot difference than the original minimum. This means that anyone who was keeping crested geckos before is now kind of expected to upgrade their crested gecko into a larger enclosure, which means that you now need to dish out this extra money and time and work and effort into a new enclosure for your animal, which in most cases people are willing to do if you want to give your animal the best care, but it is still something to consider when you are getting a reptile. And it's not just the enclosures that change, it's also their diets. New research in their diets actually helps us understand what variety we should be giving our animals as well as what supplementation they need, but that can also still make it difficult at the end of the day because everything is always changing and you just feel like you're not doing what's best for your animal at all times. And finally, tying into that pressure and feeling like you need to change, my final hardest thing about keeping reptiles on this list is actually not related to reptiles, and that is social media and overall judgment. Now, this is coming from someone who's been posting on TikTok for over a year now, and I've really felt the pressure of social media when it comes to your animals. I have posted on a bunch of different platforms before and a bunch of different kinds of content, and I've never really felt the same judgment in those different communities than I have in this reptile community. Whether you are consuming content or actively posting content, the hate in this community is undeniable, and the different little mini wars going on between certain types of keepers is also just pretty exhausting. Oftentimes, posting a video of your enclosure opens you up to crazy amounts of judgment. An example of this is actually my Hog Island boa. She is currently in a smaller enclosure, and that is just because when I got her, her original owner had her in something even smaller. Now she's getting a much larger enclosure, and I'm actively working on it and making it as amazing as I can for her. But of course, those things take money and they take time. And that's why I've just honestly not posted the enclosure that she's in currently, because I know for a fact people would get upset no matter what I explained as her future enclosure. These type of little judgments actually led me to not want to post anymore on social media, especially on TikTok, because it just can be so exhausting and hard to keep up with. On top of this, I was often buying things that I didn't necessarily need for my animals, like lighting upgrades that I didn't need right at the moment, and it led me to spending too much money at the end of the day and truly not caring about the benefits for my animals, but really just appeasing people online. I will say social media can be super great for finding advice and, just general help for your animals, but I wouldn't put all your eggs on one basket. Make sure you are doing your own research. Make sure you feel confident in your own things, because social media can really be a big bummer sometimes. But that is just my personal opinion on all of it, and I just think it makes reptile keeping at least harder for me, or it did when I was actively posting a little bit more. But that is the 5 hardest parts about keeping reptiles in my personal opinion. I hope you enjoyed this video, and definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button as well as that notification bell so you know every time I post a new video. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next week.